Hey there, welcome to another Vegas edition of Israel Explained. I'm your host, Shael Ben-Ephraim. Let's get down to business. So today we're going to be talking about the warming up of the northern front. It seems that every day we're talking about the warming up of another front, which is something that is very concerning, and I'll get back to towards the end of this video. But today we're going to be talking about Lebanon mostly. So a little bit of background on this. When the events of October 7th happened, Hezbollah joined the fray, saying that they support Gaza and support Hamas, but they've shown little willingness to escalate to an all-out war. However, the amount of damage that they've done to the north in this phase below an all-out war has been serious enough that Israel's had to evacuate tens of thousands of civilians from the villages and towns close to the border as a precaution. Not only are the bombings threatening Israeli civilians and have killed several, including two yesterday, but also there's fear that the Radwan force, the Hezbollah's elite unit, could come into Israel and try to do something similar to what Hamas did on October 7th. That's sort of a nightmare scenario. The United States has been heavily involved in the Northern Front from day one. In fact, perhaps the most important thing the US was doing early on in the war was trying to prevent it from spreading by bringing in the Dwight Eisenhower carrier force and other things. In December, the United States sent Amos Hochstein as a special envoy to try to negotiate some sort of diplomatic deal, or at the very least prevent war. That time, the Netanyahu government told the Biden administration they were willing to give a few weeks to diplomacy before they acted in Lebanon, something the Biden administration was happy to hear. But now, about a month later, that time seems to have run out. In his latest visit to Beirut a couple of days ago, Hochstein said, make an agreement or face war, essentially. He came with a red card almost from Israel saying that time has run out and Israel is about to act. What Israel is demanding so that it doesn't act is that Hezbollah move 7 kilometers from the border with Israel. So it's not sitting anymore on the border where the civilians are. And Hochstein also asked for the Lebanese army to move down south to take over the 7 kilometers and keep Hezbollah out. If you remember, in the Second Lebanon War, Resolution 1701, a bolstered UNIFIL, that's the UN peacekeepers, was supposed to keep Hezbollah out, but that didn't happen. There have been thousands of infractions. Hezbollah is back down. So this time, the US is demanding the Lebanese army go there. I'm not sure why they think that will work better, but that seems to be the plan. It's starting to emerge that the US really dropped the ball on these talks with Hochstein. He seems to have given the impression that Israel would not attack in Lebanon, that it was unlikely to attack in Lebanon because the US was restraining it, which may have served his initial diplomatic goals. But that seems to have facilitated Hezbollah in escalation and has seemed to have encouraged the Lebanese government to allow that to happen. Now that the US is switching to tough talk in Lebanon, it's probably too late. So there's definitely a failure of American foreign policy in this regard. Israel has zero expectations at this point that a diplomatic solution will be arrived at, probably correctly so. So it's trying to signal a military readiness instead. So just yesterday, Israeli reserve formations conducted an exercise led by the Northern Command, simulating an invasion of Lebanon. They also invited the press to see it, so that there would be no doubt that this is a clear warning sign from the IDF that an invasion is about to come. The removal of the 36th Division from central Gaza was also seen as a warning to Hezbollah because it's believed that they will soon be repositioned on the border with Lebanon. However, that may have backfired somewhat. 50 rockets were fired into Israel from the central refugee camps like Al Burej in Gaza not long after they left to show that they had not managed to clear the area of terrorists. So those central camps, which was the 36th Division to neutralize, may not have been premature. I read Run Ben Ishai in Ynet, perhaps Israel's senior military correspondent, saying Israel should consider bringing them back. So that may have also backfired. While all this was happening, just yesterday, Hezbollah shot an anti-tank missile into Kfar Yuval, which is near the border, killing a mother and son with a missile aimed directly at their home. The IDF believes that because of that village and that house to the border, Hezbollah had been watching them for a long time, knew that the person living there was part of the security team, waited till he was home, killed him, probably knowing that his mother was home too. Um, the terrorist organization has also been targeting hen houses, fields, orchards, anything that is the basis of the local agricultural to get people to leave and hopefully not come back. They're basically waging a war for dominance in the north, trying to get Israel to clear its population. Probably a long-term strategy to take over those areas. That really shows the danger of allowing Hezbollah to sit on the border as they have done since Israel withdrew from Lebanon back in 2000. Because of all this, the Israeli population living in the north has put a massive amount of pressure on the Netanyahu government to do something to get rid of Hezbollah over there. Meanwhile, the Americans have put massive pressure on Israel not to go into Lebanon. So that's why we've seen a very indecisive and ineffective policy in Lebanon. But even without American intervention, the Israelis are concerned about ending up in a three-front war, with the West Bank, with the PA on the verge of collapse, with Hamas not yet subdued, and with Hezbollah being the most difficult rival of all three areas. Now, there's been a change in the Lebanese government position just in the last few days, um, partially because of failure of American diplomacy, but I think also because there have been internal talks between the Lebanese government and Hezbollah, and Hezbollah has been unwilling to budge. So what are we talking about? Um, Hochstein has floated the idea that Israel and Lebanon settle the disputes over areas in the border, perhaps even in favor of Lebanon, um, going sort of along the lines of the gas field agreement that Israel and Lebanon reached in 2022. Lebanon was willing to talk along those lines about the idea of having Hezbollah withdraw for several miles in exchange for that. Israel, perhaps not very enthusiastic about making territorial concessions to Lebanon at a time of war, but still, perhaps would rather have that than all-out war with Hezbollah. Would rather have that than have an out-and-out conflict with the United States over the issue. Has agreed to that, and Lebanon was going along with that. But that has changed recently. The Lebanese government is now towing the Hezbollah line. They've said that as long as the conflict continues in Gaza, they're not going to reach any diplomatic agreement with Israel. Probably realizing they can't do this if Hezbollah isn't at least tacitly agreeing. So I think we've seen that switch because up until now, maybe they hoped they could convince Hezbollah to play along, but now they haven't. And because of that, that's one of the reasons Israel and Hochstein are abandoning hopes of a diplomatic solution because the Lebanese government has moved over. So right now, Hezbollah and Beirut are saying the same thing, which they weren't until a week ago. And this is Nasrallah's position. He said, quote, The security of the Red Sea and calm on Lebanon's front, the situation in Iraq, and all developments in the region are tied to one thing: stopping the aggression against Gaza. You are trying to deal with the consequences and the results. Go fix the reason. End quote. So that's a message that Nasrallah is sending from directly from Iran, that all of these Iranian attacks won't stop until Gaza stops. Nothing the United States does against the Houthis, against Hezbollah, against militias in Iraq, against Iran itself will stop without that. Um, so that's where we are right now. All this diplomacy has has failed. And of course, just like we talked about in yesterday's video, talking about the Palestinian Authority, Lebanon is playing chicken here against its own interests to a great extent. It's losing a lot of money every day that this continues. Sami Zugaib, economist at the Policy Initiative think tank in Beirut, said the following quote, if we had assumed a tourist revenue similar to what we had lost last year, to what we had last year, for example, around $1,500 per passenger, we're looking at something closer to around 300 million in losses only from tourist revenues. End quote. And according to the BBC, the Lebanese restaurant sector has suffered an 80% drop in business since the war started. Um, but they can't do anything about it without Hezbollah agreement, so they are going to continue to bite the bullet. Lebanon appears to have grit its teeth, is willing to bear the brunt of another Israeli invasion rather than risk some kind of internal war with Hezbollah. This could drive it into being a fully fledged failed state, but they figure it's better than trying to take on Iran, which, after all, has penetrated its state apparatus so incredibly deeply. But despite the fact that Israel is making all these signals that it's willing to go to war, it hasn't issued a firm deadline. And Benny Gantz, um, former head of the opposition, who is now part of the coalition and part of the security cabinet, today issued demands that Netanyahu make decisions on several sensitive diplomatic issues. One of those was calling for a deadline to Hezbollah in Lebanon, after which Israel would attack. So far, Israel has not done that because Netanyahu's really been avoiding making decisions on many things for his own psychological reasons and for political reasons. Um, this is bad news on one level, that what's happening diplomatically in Lebanon, but it's also good news. Hezbollah is not going to stop until Israel stops in Gaza. On the other hand, it doesn't seem to want war. It's not escalating above a certain level. It's not shooting at big Israeli cities. It's not infiltrating in large formations. It's keeping the war under wraps to some degree. Israel's assassination of Hezbollah members doesn't seem to have enraged them to the point where they're looking for full on conflict. So diplomacy has failed. That's pretty clear. The United States hasn't given up. Have a new strategy that's clearly emerging. Um, when Hochstein was in Tel Aviv, before he went to Beirut, he said that once the IDF fully transitions to low intensity operations in Gaza, that can help calm down the situation in Lebanon. He also advised the government to come out and say that it had begun low intensity phase, which the army has pretty much said. Netanyahu hasn't fully said that yet. And it's in this light that we should see the announcement by NSC spokesperson John Kirby that Israel has moved to a lower intensity fighting phase already in the south as well as in the north. They're basically trying to encourage Hezbollah to back off by saying, look, the Gaza operation is winding down. Of course, that's not going to be very successful if Israel goes into Rafah, which it may have to do, or if Israel goes into Philadelphia. But the United States is already preparing the case of, okay, now the level of the conflict is going down, so now Hezbollah and Lebanon can also lower the level of of the conflict. But under current circumstances, with the amount of pressure that Israeli government is getting from its own citizens, and the amount of pressure from the military, the desires of Gallant, the defense minister, who's a big hawk on Hezbollah, I would say the chances of an invasion of Lebanon, at least a limited one, are more likely than not. They're over 50%. And we talked in the last episode about the possibility of a Palestinian Authority collapse. Israel's already in a complex war in Gaza that it believes will go on to 2025. With that kind of time horizon, the possibility that Israel will be involved in a three-front war, and that doesn't even involve the issues in the Red Sea, which could be seen as a fourth, uh, are very likely. This is something Israel needs to be very concerned about. And I've said before, it should avoid going into Lebanon and focus on Gaza. I still believe that. Okay, let's look at some questions that we've gotten. So, Aliyah Aloha asked a question which I did not answer correctly last time, or I misunderstood the question, I should say. She asked about a poll that I talked about, and I answered talking about why the left had become stronger. But what she meant is that the Israeli public's commitment to going all out for victory has been shaken. And so there was a poll that showed that most Israelis, no, a plurality of Israelis, I should say, it was 47%, I believe, would accept a ceasefire agreement in exchange for the release of all hostages, something that would not have been true a month ago. And she asked why I think that is. Why are Israelis less gung ho about reaching full victory in Gaza? And I think part of it is because A, they're realizing that time is running out for the hostages. Um, B, it's becoming increasingly clear that this government is not able to manage the diplomatic strategic transition to the next phase. C, they're disappointed by the ability of the military, through military means, to bring Hamas down, to bow their military achievements. And things like the fact that they're still shooting missiles from the central camps will certainly not help that. So all those things are lowering belief in the operation. That was always bound to happen. Military operations start to lose support after they've been dragging on for a while. By no means is that fatal to the military effort, but it's not good news either. Cool Snow asks, let's say the worst case scenario, and perhaps the most likely scenario, Israel fails to introduce a day after goal and the war stalls out. What happens then? Well, here's the worst case scenario. It's actually pretty terrible, the worst case scenario, because, by definition, worst case scenario, Israel stays in Gaza, maybe doesn't even take over all of Gaza because it decides for diplomatic, strategic reasons to leave Rafah, etc. Continues fighting Hamas in the long term in Gaza. That continues to bolster the popularity of Hamas in the West Bank. Because Israel doesn't stop fighting in Gaza, the war continues to escalate with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel goes into Lebanon. Israel finds itself with no diplomatic support from the United States or any of the Arab states because it's not willing to look at a horizon of two-state solution, is left holding the bag in Gaza, trying to rebuild it with its own money while soldiers are getting killed by Hamas all the time. The Palestinian Authority collapses. Israel tries to hold on to the West Bank through military occupation, losing more soldiers there all the time with no international support. And in Lebanon, it ends up in a full war with Hezbollah, which is much stronger than Hamas, without diplomatic support. Eventually, sanctions are levied against Israel, and that could ultimately be the beginning of the end of the state of Israel. That is the worst case scenario. Hey, you asked, okay? Harry Newhoff asks, was the money that was halted being given to the PA money that Palestinian paid in taxes, or to the PA, or money that Israelis pay that is then transferred over? Okay, great question. A couple of people have asked me about this. It's actually neither. It's money that the Palestinian Authority levies taxes off anything that's imported into the authorities. So, if you send in a tin of biscuits into Ramallah from the Netherlands, then the Palestinian Authority puts import taxes on that, whatever percentage that is, and that's supposed to go to the Palestinian Authority. That's how every government in the world gets a lot of its budget. Israel collects that money because the Palestinian Authority is not a fully fledged independent state. And according to the Oslo Accords, Israel is responsible for the borders. So Israel is abusing the fact that it's responsible for the borders to take money that's not its money. It's not Israeli money. It's not paid by Israeli taxpayers. It has nothing to do with Israel. It doesn't belong to Israel. Israel's collecting it as part of an international agreement. It is, in fact, theft. For a security purpose, it can be justified sometimes, but it's a very problematic thing that Israel is doing. That's one of the reasons the United States is so concerned. Space-Time Odyssey asks, I have a question. Can the case South Africa filed against Israel at the ICJ be dropped if, for example, SA and Israel come to some agreement? The answer to that is actually yes. Um, right now, the ICJ hasn't even decided that it has competence over the case. So South Africa could just withdraw it today, and that would be the end of it. Once the case is before the ICJ, the two countries would be able to come to some agreement, then take it to the judges. The judges would debate it, and then it would be dismissed. So basically, South Africa, as the side issuing the complaint here, has the ability, especially now before the court has taken competence, to end this at any minute. But they've thought this through, the South Africans. They think this is good for their international standing, and there's absolutely no chance that they will do that. But theoretically, yes, they could do that. Okay, that's the end of this episode of Israel Explained. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon at Shael Media on Patreon. That's Shael Media on Patreon. Consider listening to my podcast, History of the Land of Israel podcast, and subscribe to this channel. I'll try to be here today as well. Even though I'm in Vegas, that's how much I care. Okay, see you again.